Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive? You guys sent in a ton of stuff on Bigfoot, and wow, um, this is going to be interesting. We're talking like ancient stories, blurry pictures, and that age-old question, is Bigfoot real? Or is there something else going on here?
Yeah. It's amazing how deep this goes. It's
Yeah.
not just some, internet thing.
Hmm.
We're talking centuries of stories like woven into Native American cultures.
Oh yeah, for sure. And one of the things you sent mentioned like Sasquatch and Wendigo. Were those just monsters in the woods?
No,
Hmm.
not at all.
Yeah.
They were a part of how people understood nature.
Yeah.
The source you sent talked about how they were like morning's explanations for like natural events or even like the power of the wilderness.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that we can't just, turn these traditions into scary stories around a campfire.
Right, like you're missing the whole picture.
Exactly. And speaking of the bigger picture, when Europeans showed up, things got even more interesting. You had all these new people coming to this wild new land. And guess what? They started seeing things that sounded a lot like Bigfoot.
Oh man, can you imagine? Like every little noise, every shadow, you'd think it was Bigfoot.
And those stories got passed down, mixed in with the Native American stories.
Hmm.
And eventually you start to see the Bigfoot myth we know today.
And then bam, the 1900s, everything just explodes.
Totally. Everyone's
Yeah.
talking about Bigfoot footprints, mysterious sounds, and then there's that famous Patterson-Gimlin film that still has people arguing. One of your sources actually really dug into that film, like the way the creature walks the light and shadows. Pretty fascinating.
Wow, so did they figure anything out?
Well, they make a good case for why it might be real. But even they admit there are some doubts. And that brings us back to the big question, is there any real scientific evidence to back all this up?
Right, that's the million-dollar question. A lot of what you sent talked about Gigantopithecus. What's that all about?
Okay, so Gigantopithecus was a real creature, a huge ape that lived in Asia millions of years ago. And some people think Bigfoot could be like a descendant of this thing. One of your sources even went into detail comparing skeletons and how this ape might have gotten to North America.
Whoa, that's wild. But is there any proof?
That's the problem. There aren't any Gigantopithecus fossils in North America, and as far as we know, they died out a long time ago,
So we're back to footprints, blurry pictures, and people saying they saw something.
basically. And while those can be interesting, they're not enough for scientists. Especially when you think about how easily we can be tricked. One source you sent talked about how, like, darkness, adrenaline, even what we expect to see can make us misidentify things.
It's like when you're in the woods at night and every shadow looks like a monster.
Exactly. Our brains like to find patterns even when they aren't there. And then you add in our fascination with the unknown. No wonder people see things that might not actually be there.
So does that mean everyone who says they saw Bigfoot is just imagining things?
Not necessarily. People have real experiences they can't explain,
Yeah.
but big claims need big proof. And when it comes to Bigfoot, that proof is still missing.
One source mentioned government cover-ups and conspiracies. Did you buy into any of that?
Well, it's definitely a fun idea, right? A secret government group hiding all the Bigfoot evidence. But when you actually look at the arguments, they're mostly speculation, not real evidence.
Okay, so maybe not the government, but even if Bigfoot isn't real, like a flesh and blood creature, it's definitely had a huge impact on our culture. Like movies, TV shows, books, even whole towns that rely on Bigfoot tourism.
No, absolutely. Bigfoot's become this cultural icon,
Yeah.
the symbol of the wild, the unknown, the things we don't understand. One of your sources said, Bigfoot represents our fear of nature, the parts of nature we haven't tamed.
That's interesting. It's like Bigfoot embodies those fears about what's hiding out there.
Right. And that fascination, that fear, has a real impact on our world.
And don't forget about the internet and social media. It's like anyone with a phone can be a Bigfoot hunter, now sharing their stories, pictures, and theories instantly.
Yeah, and one of your sources actually talked about how that can be a problem, with all the misinformation and disinformation about Bigfoot.
Makes sense. It's easy to get caught up in it all and share things without checking if they're true.
Exactly. We have to remember, not all information is the same. We need to think critically, check our sources, and be careful about anything that seems too good to be true.
So after all this research, are we any closer to answering the question, is Bigfoot real?
Well, that's the big one, isn't it?
Yeah.
And honestly, there's no easy answer.
Yeah.
But even if we never, find that definitive proof, I think the search itself can teach us a lot.
What do you mean by that?
Well, it makes us think about what we don't know.
Hmm.
There are still mysteries out there, and it reminds us to be curious.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's not just about finding Bigfoot, it's about the journey.
Right. And speaking of journeys, one of your sources talked about how technology is changing how we look for Bigfoot.
Really? Like, what did they say?
They talked about things like cameras with infrared sensors and recorders that can pick up sounds we can't even hear, and drones with heat-sensing cameras. It's pretty wild.
Wow, that's insane. It's like we're giving ourselves superpowers.
Yeah, and there's DNA analysis too. People are taking samples of hair, soil, water, hoping to find Bigfoot's DNA.
That would be huge. Imagine Bigfoot DNA found on like every news
It
site.
would change everything for sure. But even with all this tech, finding Bigfoot is still really hard.
Like finding a needle in a haystack.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder what keeps those researchers going, you know? What drives them even when people are skeptical.
I was thinking the same thing. One source mentioned it's not always about the evidence. It's about connecting with nature, that sense of adventure.
Yeah, like they're explorers going into uncharted territory. Not just places, but like scientifically too.
And maybe a little bit of romanticism too,
Yeah.
right? The idea of finding a creature that's like pure wilderness.
Right. And that brings us to why we believe things. Why are we so drawn to these stories? Why do some people believe in Bigfoot even without proof?
That's a great question. One of the sources said our brains are always trying to find patterns and make sense of the world, even if it means we have to use our imagination to fill in the gaps.
Exactly. And then you add in the power of stories, how they get passed down through generations. No wonder they become so powerful.
So it's not just about what we see, it's about how we see the world, the stories we tell, and wanting to believe in something bigger than ourselves.
Totally. And one of the sources even brought up confirmation bias. We look for information that supports what we already believe and ignore stuff that doesn't.
Oh, yeah, I know that one. Like when you get a new car and suddenly you see that car everywhere.
Right? Same with Bigfoot. If you already believe every weird noise, every broken branch becomes proof.
Are you saying believing in Bigfoot is more about psychology than reality?
Not exactly.
Yeah.
But we have to understand how our minds work.
Mm-hmm.
We can't just say everyone who believes is crazy.
Good point. It's about realizing that belief is complicated, and a lot of things influence it. Our experiences, our backgrounds, even how our brains are wired.
Exactly. And one of your sources said that believing in Bigfoot is often connected to feeling like you belong somewhere.
Oh, like those ghost hunting shows where it's always a group of friends going out together.
Yeah. There's a social side to it, a feeling of shared experience. And that's even stronger online, where people from all over can connect.
So it's not just about what one person believes, it's about how those beliefs get shared and amplified in a group.
Right. Which can be good and bad. It can make you feel like you belong, but it can also create echo chambers where people only hear what they want to hear.
Like those online groups where everyone agrees and if you disagree, they shut you down.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to think
Imagine.
critically. Be open to different ideas, evaluate the evidence, and be willing to change your mind.
Basically, don't just assume you're always right.
Pretty much. It's about recognizing that what we believe isn't always the absolute truth.
Right. It's shaped by our experiences and biases.
Exactly. Which leads to another important point, the ethics of searching for Bigfoot.
One of the sources mentioned that some people think we should just leave Bigfoot alone, like not mess with its habitat or try to capture it.
Right. It's a valid point. If Bigfoot exists, we should respect it, not exploit it for our own curiosity.
Kind of like the debate about studying endangered species, we have to be careful not to harm what we're trying to understand.
Exactly. I think that's something we all have to think about. Are we prepared for what might happen if we find Bigfoot?
It's a heavy question for sure, but it reminds us that this isn't just a fun mystery. What we do has real consequences, even when it comes to something like Bigfoot.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways from all this. The search for Bigfoot is about more than just finding a creature. It's about exploring the unknown, questioning what we think we know, and thinking about how we relate to nature and to each other.
Wow, it's like we went from ancient myths to high-tech Bigfoot hunting in like an hour.
It really shows you how much there is to uncover. One question can lead to so many different paths.
Yeah, and I feel like we've barely scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore.
That's the thing with mysteries like this. They always leave you wanting more. There's always something else to discover.
So as we wrap up all this Bigfoot research, what are some of the main things you hope our listener takes away?
I think the most important thing is to think critically, Whether it's Bigfoot or the news or anything really, we need to question what we see and hear.
Like, don't just believe everything you read online.
Exactly. Check where the information's coming from. Consider different viewpoints, and don't be afraid to ask why. Especially with social media, it's so easy to get caught up in misinformation.
It's like we all need to be fact checkers now, which is a good skill to have these days.
I agree. And besides being critical, I hope you also take away a sense of wonder. You know, the world's full of mysteries. Some we'll figure out, some we won't.
Going through all this stuff with you, it definitely brought back that feeling of like anything is possible. I think I kind of lost that as I got older.
That's what I love about topics like this. They remind us there's still things we don't understand. It can be a bit scary, but also pretty exciting.
It's not about finding all the answers, is it? It's about the journey.
Exactly. And that makes me think of another important point. Belief is a really complex thing.
Yeah, we talked about that a bit. How our experiences, our brains, even who we hang out with, all plays a part.
Right. So when you meet people who believe differently than you about Bigfoot or anything, really try to see things from their perspective. You don't have to agree, but it makes for a better conversation.
Instead of just arguing online.
Yeah. A little empathy can go a long way.
So we've got critical thinking, staying curious, and remembering that belief is complicated.
Mm.
Anything else before we leave the world of Bigfoot?
Just this next time you're out in nature, really pay attention. Listen to the sounds. Look closely at things. Most people miss the details. And who knows? Maybe you'll see something that makes you question everything.
Ooh, that's kind of creepy. I like it.
All right.
It's like you're giving our listeners a challenge of Bigfoot quest.
You never know what's out there until you look right. That's what this whole deep dive has been about.
Well said. A big thanks to our expert for guiding us through all this Bigfoot stuff. And to you listening, thanks for joining us on this adventure.
It was fun.
Keep those questions coming, keep exploring, and remember the truth is out there somewhere. Until next time, happy deep diving.